The last stars were fading when Dr. Adrian Vale climbed the ridge above the drowned harbor, his boots slipping on stones that had once been streets. Below him, the sea lay flat and silver, hiding the bones of a city that legend swore had angered the gods. He carried a folded map and a hunger he could not fully explain, a need to prove that the old stories were not lies but memories, bruised and reshaped by the long passage of centuries. The wind off the water smelled of salt and something older, and he thought he could almost hear the murmur of people who had walked here before the waves came to claim them. Every myth, he believed, began with something true: a flood, a fire, a king who reached too far. He knelt and pressed his palm against a shattered column, and the cold of it went straight into his chest like a warning and an invitation at once. He had spent his life chasing the seams where story and history met. Where others read a tale of a monster in the labyrinth and saw only fantasy, Adrian saw the shudder of a real earthquake, the collapse of a palace so vast that survivors could only describe it as a maze that ate men whole. Where others heard of a war between gods hurling thunder across the sky, he heard the memory of a volcano, its ash blotting the sun, its roar rewritten into the voices of the divine. To him, the legends were not decorations on the edge of the past. They were the past itself, folded and hidden, waiting for someone patient enough to unfold it. And so he had come to this ruined coast, following a story of a proud people swallowed by the sea in a single terrible night, certain that beneath the poetry lay a wound that had truly bled. A voice cut across the quiet. "You look like a man praying to a puddle." Professor Mira Kessler stood a few paces behind him, her coat pulled tight, her eyes bright with the particular sharpness of someone who trusted only what she could measure. "There is no lost city here, Adrian. There is sediment, and there is your imagination filling in the gaps." He rose and met her gaze without flinching. "The gaps are exactly where the truth hides, Mira. A myth is a scar. It tells you a body was hurt long before you arrived." She shook her head, but she did not leave, and he had learned that her refusal to walk away was its own quiet form of belief. They descended together toward the waterline, where the tide had pulled back to reveal the outline of foundations, geometric and deliberate, too ordered to be an accident of stone. Adrian crouched over a slab carved with spirals and waves, and his breath caught. These were not idle decorations. They were a record, a people's attempt to explain what had happened to them, the sea rising in the carving like a living thing with teeth. He imagined the night it came. The tremor that woke the sleeping households, the harbor draining strangely as if the ocean were gathering breath, and then the wall of water that turned a proud city into a legend told in frightened whispers for 1,000 years. He felt the grief of it settle over him, heavy and real, as though the drowned were pressing close to be remembered. "Even if something happened here," Mira said, kneeling beside him despite herself, "you cannot prove that this is the flood the old poets wrote about. Stories drift. They gather details from 100 disasters and stitch them into one." Adrian nodded slowly. "You are right, that is exactly what memory does. It takes the eruption and the earthquake and the famine and the fallen king, and it braids them into a single unforgettable shape. The myth is not one event. It is the sum of everything a people could not bear to forget." He traced the carved wave with a gentle finger. "Somewhere in that braid is a real night when real people looked up at the water and understood they were going to die." They worked as the sun climbed, uncovering fragments of a world that history had reduced to a single sentence in an ancient scroll. A child's clay toy still bearing the marks of small fingers. A merchant's weights scattered as if dropped in a moment of panic. A doorway that led nowhere now but had once opened onto a life. With each object, Adrian felt the distance between then and now grow thin, until the drowned people seemed almost to stand beside him, their fear and their love pressing against the veil of centuries. He thought of how their end had become a warning, a story parents told their children about pride and the anger of the sea, and he marveled at how disaster hardens into legend, how a wound becomes a lesson dressed in the robes of the divine. By afternoon, they had found the thing that changed Mira's face. A wall half buried, painted with figures fleeing a rising tide, while above them a great figure loomed with arms outstretched, neither wholly human nor wholly beast. "There," Adrian said softly. "That is how it begins." The survivors could not say the sea simply rose, they needed a hand behind it, a will. a god who was angered so that the horror would have meaning instead of being only cruel and blind. Mira stared at the painted figure for a long moment. They turned their catastrophe into a story so they could survive remembering it. Adrian smiled without joy. Every legend you have ever dismissed is someone's way of surviving what happened to them. They followed the wall into a chamber the sea had spared, and there the story deepened. Carvings showed not only the flood but the rain that came before it, a line of rulers who had grown vast and grasping, who had waged war on their neighbors and stripped the land bare, until the disaster fell upon a people already weakened by their own hunger for power. Adrian read it like a sentence handed down across time. The gods in the myth had punished pride, yes, but the pride had been real, the wars had been real, the exhaustion of a kingdom that reached too far had been real. The legend had simply given a moral spine to a collapse that history recorded only as an ending. He felt the weight of it, the way a single catastrophe could be the final blow to a civilization that had already been undermining itself for generations. "You see it now," he said quietly. Mira did not answer at once. She ran her hand over the carved rulers, their faces worn smooth by water and time. "I see a power struggle," she admitted. "I see a kingdom that made enemies and drained itself, and then the earth and the sea finished what its own kings had begun. And someone took all of that and made it a myth about divine punishment." She looked at him. "It is almost more frightening as truth than as legend." Adrian nodded. "That is why the stories last. They carry the real terror inside a shape we can hold." As the light began to fail, they climbed back toward the ridge, carrying rubbings of the carvings and a silence heavy with understanding. Adrian paused at the top and looked back at the drowned harbor, now swallowed again by the returning tide. Somewhere in the world, he knew, children were still hearing the story of an angry god and a city beneath the waves, never knowing that the tale was a message sent forward by the dead. The people here had not simply vanished. They had encoded their ending into a legend so unforgettable that it had outlived their names, their language, and their gods. In that way, they had never truly died at all. "We came looking for a myth," Mira said beside him, "and we found a memory." Adrian tightened his grip on the fragile paper in his hands. "They are the same thing, Mira, they always were. Every flood, every burning city, every war between heaven and earth is a real disaster wearing a mask so that we can bear to look at it. The sea sighed against the ruins below, patient and vast, keeping its secrets close." And as the last light died over the water, Adrian felt the drowned city breathe once more through the story it had left behind. Its truth carried forward on the tide of legend, waiting for anyone willing to listen closely enough to hear the human voice.